In this lesson, we will learn how to bake animation down to a character skeleton. The scene is 0 to begin. Let's go ahead and hit play and take a look at what we have in this file. So here we see little Rexy hopping through this set, gets distracted by this tree, so he runs over to take a closer look. Now the exciting thing is, this is the same rig that we have built in Volume 3 put to good use. So we have created an animation-ready rig then that we can be confident about. Now what do we do by Volume 5? Well, this is where we start to remove all non-essential items. That would just be a waste of space. So after the animation has been approved, we can then go in and remove things like our control rig, all of its systems. We can get rid of our skeleton even. We can bake the animation down to the point level of this mesh, and what we're left with is a lighter scene. So that's the goal. That way, when we're ready to hand our file off to the next artist, possibly to light the scene, they're just concerned with what they need to and no other distractions. Alright, so to get started, let's go ahead and head over to Tools, Manage Layers. And what we'll do is check to make sure that all of our envelope objects are stored in the skeleton layer, because this will make it easier for us to bake the animation down. So I'll show all of its contents. I'll go ahead and hide the model. What we can do is go ahead and choose Select at the top. Alright, great. I want to make sure that we select the skeleton. So we'll just double check again to make sure that all of those objects are highlighted. And if you need to add any objects to this layer, it's just a matter of selecting that object, grabbing the layer, and choosing Add. Alright, sweet. Now, the next thing we want to make sure of is that we can get back to the character's skin pose or neutral position. We can do so by going to frame 0, but why would we want to do that? Well, if we plan on adding any corrective targets to fix deformations we don't quite like, it's very important for us to get back to that skin pose. Essentially what's happening is, that is the actual pose of our character. Do not be confused by that because of it moving around in the scene. It's the shape of the character that's being driven, but the character itself is actually at that neutral position. So if we add a corrective target at the wrong position, you'll notice that the mesh is going to slide or offset. So let's make sure we get back to that skin position. Another reason why you'd want to do that is if you're working with any simulations and you would like them to interact with the character in some way, a lot of times you go back to that neutral position to have the simulation rest on the model before the animation plays through. And that's important for cloth and things like that. Alright, but what we'll do is go to our track bar, we'll hold down Control Alt, and we'll drag with our left mouse button over to our right to reveal frame 0. So take a look. The character does have a skin pose, but it's not complete. You can see that the tail is slightly off. It's pointed down when it should be up. So we can fix this a few ways. If we were to turn on Auto Key, we can go to Controls. We'll go ahead and show all of its contents. We can grab all of our tail controls, and then we can Alt-right click and use Transform to 0 from the Animation Quad menu to bring it back. So that's one way. Another way is to check first if there are any animation layers in this file. Let's go ahead and undo this back, because if there are any animation layers, chances are this offset might be coming from that layer. And if that's the case, we can make the fix from there. So let's go to Animation and choose Animation Layers. Alright, great. From here, let's go ahead and select just one of our tail controls, and we'll see that we do have an animation layer in this file, Tail Offset. And this is used to create the wag and the tail at the end of the animation. Alright, so knowing that, we can basically go in and make sure that this layer is zeroed out on our skin pose frame, frame 0. So let's go there, we'll find Tail Offsets, we'll go to its weight, and we'll right click to zero that out, and take a look. Now the tail has been brought back. Now we don't want to lose any of the animation that we've added to this layer, so let's go to the following frame on frame 1. And we'll just go ahead and set the layer's weight back to 100%. Alright, great. So once everything has been brought back, we're basically ready to bake the animation down. Now before we do, there's something very important we want to check for. I'll tell you now that Most of the skeleton is going to bake just fine, but there are a few items, few critical pieces that will not bake. And if they don't bake, the animation will not be saved properly. We'll lose a lot of work. So those objects I'm referring to are the root and pelvis because they have been directly linked to their animation controls instead of being constrained to them. With the other objects, we're just fine because they either have a constraint or some type of system driving their position in a way where we can track all of that information and bake keyframes on each of those poses. But when an object is directly linked, there is no offset to track. So what we get are constant keys, no changes at all. So to get this to work, let's go ahead and first go to Tools, Manage Layers, and we'll go ahead and hide our character. Let's go ahead and hide that model. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the objects that have been linked instead of constrained. The pelvis is one of them, so if we were to grab that envelope object and press page up, you can see it has been linked to the pelvis control. If we were to grab the root, that's the next object, and hit page up, again, it has been linked to the center of gravity. So the problem is, if these objects don't move after we bake everything down, of course the animation is going to cause the character to kind of stay put in one spot and everything else will move. And we don't want that. Alright, so here's what we'll do. We'll grab the root and we'll unlink it. Next, let's go ahead and grab the pelvis and make sure it's a part of the root hierarchy. So once we do that, once we have linked that pelvis over to our root, you'll notice that when the root is selected and we press Control page down, everything gets highlighted. Alright, great. So next, let's go ahead and grab our select tool with the Q key. What we want to do now is go ahead and work on constraining our root and the pelvis to their controls. That way we have those offset values to track with keyframes. So we're going to grab our root. We can Alt-right click to access our constraints from our Animation Quad menu if we've added them there, or of course we can go to Animation, Constraints, and we can find them here. But either way, let's apply a position constraint. We'll tie that to our center of gravity control, and we'll also apply an orientation constraint to that same object. For the pelvis, with that selected, we're constraining to its control object, this sphere-looking shape. So, we'll apply a position constraint, and then an orientation constraint. Alright, sweet. So, if we were to bring our model back and start scrubbing through the animation, we'll notice that everything's playing back just fine. Great stuff. Alright, let's head back to frame 0. We're ready to bake the animation. We'll go ahead and hide our model. We'll go to our skeleton layer, and we'll go ahead and choose Select at the top to grab all of those objects. We'll now go to the File menu and choose Export, Export Selected. Let's give this a name. We'll call this Rexy _ animation. Let's now choose Save. Now, very important, we have a few options to turn on here. We're working with animation, so let's make sure that's checked. And we, of course, want the animation to be baked, so let's make sure that's checked. Now, taking a look at our settings here, we do want our start frame 0, so we can keep that skin pose, so that's good. And the end frame is 70, so that's good. Step, this is basically what frames will be baked out. So with 1, that means every single frame in this range is going to be baked. If this was set to 2, that means every other frame would be baked. So that gives you an idea as to how the step parameter works. We also want to turn on Resample All. This will make sure that all objects native to Max will be baked properly. So when this is off, Max will go through and selectively bake items that aren't necessarily native to 3ds Max. So it's safe to make sure that both of these options are checked for a successful plot. Alright, we're ready to now choose OK. We'll give 3ds Max a quick second. Alright, beautiful. So now it's time to import the animation back to all of these envelope objects. So with everything still highlighted, we can go to Import, Import at the top, and we'll go ahead and grab that same file. It was added in your export folder. That's where it goes by default, so we just want to navigate to that same folder and find our file and choose Open. Now we have a few options here that we want to check for. Underneath include, let's switch this from add to update animation because that's what we want to do. We don't want to add anything like any bone objects or anything else like that to our scene. We just want to update the animation. And since we're working with animation, let's make sure that's checked. All right, sweet. So we now can choose OK. We'll give 3ds Max a quick second and take a look. Looks like everything has worked successfully. To know for sure, let's go ahead and bring back our model, and let's go ahead and scrub through the animation. All right, so everything looks great, but now this is where we really get to test the system out. So let's start removing all of these objects except for the model and skeleton. All right, so we'll start at our controls layer. With that selected, we'll choose Select Highlighted Objects at the top. And now let's go ahead and delete those objects. Oh, it's getting dangerous now. Let's go to the next few layers. I'll go ahead and show those. All the way down to the IKs layer. So we'll go to the next one, select those objects, and delete. We'll go to the next, select, and delete. There's the hidden layer. Let's go ahead and take care of that. Beautiful. And IKs. Let's go ahead and get those removed. We can now go ahead and highlight all of these empty layers and trash them. All right, let's go ahead and test this out. So watch this. As we start to scrub through, you can see that everything still plays back just fine. How cool is that? So we've managed to bake the animation down to the skeleton. Cool. So why take this step, and why not just go ahead and bake everything down to the mesh instead? Well, sometimes we want to go in and correct a pose or two, and we can still do that with the skeleton around. Of course, once that skeleton is gone, that makes things a bit more difficult to make corrections like that. So we can keep the skeleton. We could save this out in a separate file in case we need to go back and make any corrections. But then we'd be ready to add corrective targets and then go back in and bake all of those changes down to the mesh. So we just have a few more things to cover before we're finished.